given into the temptations of the flesh.
You said you were thinking about me all day.
Chris is kinda stupid. Chris is kinda dumb, but he's like a lot of people I left in the past. He's somewhat interesting. This show has a few problems that need dissection. Chris Rock is a comedian, so of course he's going to strike a deal with Comedy Central in order to pull the network millions of dollars. This is a dude who didn't mind having his Hollywood humiliation ritual come in the form of a slap from his former crush's spouse. So now it's time for Christopher to shine. Why can't we just let classics be classics? I get it, this entire nostalgia trip is an easy cash grab, but it kinda ruins everything. Plus, this show is guilty of pulling one of the biggest tactics that reboots do that make them piss poor to watch. Let me explain.
The Big Dipper.
Alright, so you know how the story goes. Chris is a guy in school and he's having the typical coming of age problems. Except this time it's different because it's being told through the lens of a black guy in the trenches. That's the entire appeal of the show. This series is basically the black person's version of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. There are a bunch of wacky characters, of course. For example, this dude's racist white principal. This reminds me of the white teachers I had in high school who tried so hard to show that they're not racist, so whenever they saw a black kid, they'll do that one maneuver from Madagascar. They just smile and wave. The original series was cool, Chris dealing with the troubles Tanya and Drew bring, plus dealing with the typical high school woes. The animated series is no different, so to catch you up to speed, the series picks off where the original one left off. The whole GED saga. I'm not here to explain each episode, I just want to talk about the faults this show carries. And I just want to preface that for crying out loud guys, this show isn't even that horrible. I had to bend the truth in the thumbnail because if I didn't you wouldn't have clicked on this video. People tend to take my opinion way too seriously sometimes. I'm just a stranger on the net and so are you. Anyways, enough blabbing. In a nutshell, this show never needed to be made. It's funny how the voice of Greg is basically prepping for reboots. Vincent, the voice of Greg, was also the original actor who played Chris's best friend in the original series, is going to be in Phineas and Ferb's spin-off. Keep in mind that he didn't really get his shine throughout this series. Greg is voiced by someone else, but that's a story for another time. This reboot is kind of bland, the reason being that the narrator is basically at times trying to do stand-up sets within the show, which is fine because that was the entire format for the original series. However, now it feels like the show is not adding anything new to the original except for it being a bunch of colorful pixels. Like I feel like there's about to be a whole new generation of people who have no idea what the original was. That's like growing up on Ben 10 and Ben 10 Alien Force, then all of a sudden you see a network trying to squeeze the life out of their IP to save their dying network. Like for crying out loud, why did CN make Ben 10 Omniverse? That just tarnished Ben's legacy, but that's a story for another time. That's the same thing with this reboot. Chris was telling studio execs how they can animate his trauma and brighten up the saturation so it can rock the viewer's world. See what I did there? You get it, cause Chris Rock? Never mind. I have mixed feelings about this animated reboot, but at least Chris is self-aware to come to the conclusion that people are going to be looking at him sideways for this. In the first episode, he has a meta reference to how everyone hates reboots, and ironically some people are going to hate Chris for this, hence why everybody still hates Chris. The show follows too many black stereotypes, like when they were there in the actual series it was cleverly intertwined with the story. Now it feels like we can animate a funny bit about how black people don't know their fathers. So let's do it. Or maybe let's put a joke about how this bum on the block has all the hoes and like 50 kids. I feel like this series is just a continuation to an alternative ending in a different timeline. But at the same time, everything feels expected. Like yeah, Tanya's as snobby as ever, Drew's the ladies man, Chris is Chris, Greg is Greg, but at the same time there's alienation to this familiarity. Everything feels familiar, but is strange at the same time. I have a strong feeling Chris Rock walked into the Comedy Central boardroom and was like, reboot, 2D, lots and lots of money. Then everyone at the meeting was like, did you say money? Money? I'm kind of tired of the whole black series about the whole black experience trope and it never being anything out of the norm. That's why when there's a show with a bunch of black people who aren't doing stereotypical black things or facing black problems, we all pay more attention. When you see shows like this now, you already can tell that it'll center around a dysfunctional family that has problems pertaining to housing and jobs and finances. The kid is a troubled individual, flunking at life or down that path. Throw in a love interest who's somewhat stable and boom, you have a recipe for a series about the black experience. It's like a series that involves drugs. Trust me, there's going to be a villain who's Mexican, it's guaranteed, and there will definitely be a whole arc about Colombia or Mexico thrown in there. Yes, I'm talking about you, Breaking Bad. The second episode is all about Chris wanting to be that guy. Like he wants to feel like he's Timothy. He wants to boost his public image and be the man. You can sort of tell where the entire episode will end up by the time the 20-minute runtime is over. This show is kinda inconsistently bad when it comes to generating B-plots. Hear me out before you type a whole thesis in the comment section. The first episode's B-plot is all about the mattress and the fact that Chris's mom is bad at keeping JOBs. Now you might be wondering, okay, so what's wrong with that, you prick? The second episode has no B-plot, really. Hear me out, hear me out. The second episode is one long narrative about how Chris is trying to be mature. Then there's this side plot about how Julius is preparing a block party and he wants Rochelle's mac and cheese. Speaking of mac and cheese, Chris is lying about his identity so he can get Tasha's mac and cheese. But it turns out she's now reformed and blah, blah. You know how that convo goes. The point of me saying this is because some arcs just seem like a boring time filler. But there are positives to this show. I see a lot of people moaning about the art style. Come on bro, what art style did you want it to have? I think it matches and suits the time in which the events took place. If you disagree with me, then you're missing a chromosome. People are acting as though this art style looks like American Dad or Family Guy. The show keeps some of the most important members from the original cast, so it makes it feel as though I'm actually watching the original. Well, sometimes. Like thank the man upstairs that Julius is still being played by Terry Crews. I can't imagine anyone else moaning and crying that they're broke other than him. It's a shame that Tyler James Williams isn't reprising his role, but it makes sense. Dude's voice is really deep now, plus he's too busy laundering money from ABC to his bank account. Most of the characters have the exact same traits and characteristics of the original. That sounds like it should be obvious, but it's really easy to fuck that up. Think of the Good Times reboot that Seth MacFarlane brought to Netflix. That show is awful. There are pros about this show that I think people overlook. Unlike Good Times, it has the same main producer of the original, which is good. At least the creative control is in the hands of someone who actually has sentimental value to the series. Having Chris Rock not narrate and oversee the show would be like Man of Action not writing Ben 10 or Dan Schneider not making foot fetish references in one of his shows. All I'm saying is that we could have just had this be a spin-off with Chris and Greg in college running trains on these hoes. Even if it were to be animated, that would be way more interesting. If you enjoyed this video, consider violently touching the like button. I'm giving you full consent to do so. Word on the street is that that button's into that sort of kinky shit. So provided the much needed pleasure. But if it brings you immense pleasure to displease the like button, be my guest. Okay, now I'm just talking shit. That boy sus. This is definitely a show not meant to offend anyone, because I know for a fact if this was airing on Adult Swim, Chris would have called him a fat